Welcome back to On Campus Sports. I'm host Tyler Ebner with co-host Brandon Fudge and Rashad Stribling. We're going to kick off today talking about the games from last night, Oregon versus Stanford and Baylor versus Oklahoma. And we learned two things. Oregon is still having trouble with Stanford and Baylor is for real. What did you guys learn from last night?
I learned that Oregon's kryptonite is a physical team. When you have a defensive line that can push the pocket, you can destroy Oregon's offense completely. It goes back to 2009 Boise State, 2010 Ohio State, 2011 Auburn, and 2012 and 13 Stanford.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the Mariota injury. I think it was apparent that he was not completely himself yesterday. But that being said, Stanford punched Oregon in the mouth. They continually converted third downs. And that was the thing, like Rashad said, the physical team continues to be the kryptonite to Oregon.
And if you guys watched last night, the commentators were so hard on Mariota. And what I learned, I actually gained more respect for him because
Absolutely.
They were down getting black and blue. They were getting killed 26-0. He didn't give up. And you could tell he was in a lot of pain, and he was fighting through that. And he almost got a miracle. They almost somehow came back and possibly won that game. So I gained a lot more respect for Mariota last night. And another thing we learned, Bryce Petty can run.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know Bryce Petty could run as well as he could. And Oklahoma stuck around for as long as they could, but it was just apparent. They were missing one of their best guys. Bell's he's not super great, let's be honest. And Petty, they just put up too many points. So it was a matter of time until Baylor pulled away enough to the point where Oklahoma had no chance of catching up.
Yeah, what I took away from the Baylor game is that Baylor's defense is more legitimate than I thought they had been. They were tested for the first time, and like you mentioned, Bell isn't an elite quarterback, but that defense doesn't have to be elite per se to win Baylor a lot of games or make them capable of going undefeated because of how effective their offense is. So the fact that they could slow Oklahoma State down that much, that was the big takeaway from the Baylor game for me.
I think my biggest takeaway that Baylor was for real. I didn't think, they had played anybody leading up to the Oklahoma game, but they showed me they have a legitimate defense, and they put me in the mind of the 2011 Oklahoma State team. But this Baylor's team is better equipped offensively than that 2011 Oklahoma State team, and they shouldn't lose any games moving forward.
And I agree with that. We'll find out a lot more about them because they have Texas Tech coming up. They have Oklahoma State, TCU. I know TCU's a little down, but it's a big rivalry game. They still have a very good defense.
Texas.
And they have Texas as well.
Correct.
So Baylor, if people are still questioning because they beat Oklahoma, who's been kind of like a roller coaster like we've talked about since 2005, they have 4 more games to solidify that point that they are for real. And as far as Stanford, the takeaway from that, to me, was Gaffney. Because he was a workhorse, and he reminded me of Mariota's heart in that game. He just didn't give up. And he was only averaging, I believe, 3.6 yards a carry, but he just didn't give up. And he was big when they needed him to be. If there was 4 yards, he would get that to keep the drive going or waste the clock. And he was a lot of reason. I think they were averaging, 8.5 minutes per possession.
Wow.
A lot of that was Gaffney.
And you're right, and they were playing keep away from from Oregon, and that Stanford offensive line just pretty much imposed their will on that front 7 of Oregon. And to Oregon's defense, they didn't really play anybody going towards the Stanford game. And I just think Oregon is the popular pick year in and year out because they have the flashy uniforms and flashy offense, but at the end of the day, it comes down to executing, running the football, play action pass, and being physical, and that's what Oregon is lacking tremendously and have lacked in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think that Oregon is a legitimate team. I don't think anything should be taken away from Oregon, and everything should be given to Stanford for what they did. They just continually, with Gaffney, get gut shot after gut shot, and that was the difference. The time of possession, like you mentioned, and being able to get 3, 4, 3, and converting third downs. The longest run Gaffney had in the game was 9 yards. That's unreal. That's why I agree with the announcing last night. Palmer was unreasonably harsh, I feel like, on Oregon, continuously saying Mariota's giving up, Oregon's giving up. They just were outmatched on the fronts, and Oregon's a good team, but like we said at the beginning of the segment, we just understand their kryptonite better.
And I liked what Pollock said last night, where they're talking about the Stanford-Ohio State Rose Bowl matchup, but I like the one that he possibly said could happen was Michigan State, because you see that big offensive line versus Michigan State's big defensive line. That would be a fight, and I'd be interested to see what happens. But I think Stanford, in my opinion, now is going to win the Pac-12, so it's going to be interesting to see. And I think Baylor should win the Big 12.
Yeah,
so we'll see what happens.
That would be an old-fashioned football game right there, Michigan State, Stanford.
Slugfest, for sure.